All right, this is a translation and a discussion of Pliny's letter 727, and we're going to be going through chapters 6 through 7. And so therefore, follow along and let's learn more about these hauntings that obviously Pliny the Younger has heard about and therefore causes him to believe in ghosts. So we're talking about the second story of haunting, which of course is this haunted house. Inde, thenceforth, or from there, for the inhabitants, that is your dative case, the ones inhabiting, so this is a present active participle that we are obviously then making a substantive. Tristes and dirai are both modifying noctes. Sad and dire nights are stayed awake. This is another example of the impersonal passive that Latin loves to use that we do not have much in English, in which it would not say necessarily as much the boys entered the room, but they would say it was entered into the room by the boys. And so instead of saying they stayed awake throughout the night was stayed awake, and it was stayed awake per metum, through fear. And of course that verb is wigilo, wigilare, that we learn in Ecce Romani. Morbus, disease, was following a deponent verb, sequor, sequi, secutus sum, the wakefulness, the staying awake, the vigilance, as it were. And with the fear increasing, present active participle from cresco, crescere, it's where we get the word crescendo, and it means obviously to increase. Excuse me. With the fear increasing, death followed. For during the day, inter view, we have that from Ecce Romani, also, although the imago, the image, now obviously it could be dangerous or it could be not that dangerous but confusing. When you see a word like imago, you must understand that this nominative is the, of course, variant form. Imago, and then of course imaginis. This is of course the word for the image. But also too, I'd like to point out really quickly that the imagines is the term for the images or the death masks of your ancestors that you would make. And so therefore a Roman household would, for when an elder a person would die, they would make a wax death mask of that person and keep them in the house in somewhat of a kind of worship space to, of course, honor the ancestors and the spirits of the ancestors, and they were called the imagines. They were kept in an area of the house called the lararium. If you remember back in Latin 1, the household gods are the lares and the penates, and included among them are going to be the spirits of the ancestors that obviously you would honor and venerate. So, although the image here, though, not talking about the imagines, but rather the actual ghost itself, had gone away, pluperfect with that erat, and of course this is that verb, cedo, cedere, cesi, cesus, with an ab on the front of it meaning away. So although the image had gone away, the memory of the image was wandering on front of, or wandering upon, in front of the eyes. And so therefore, even though the image is not there to actually scare you, when indeed he is gone or it is gone, you still obviously can close your eyes and see it still there. And that's what this is saying. The memory of the image was wandering in front of the eyes. And the fear was longer than the causes of the fear. And so therefore, it is going to be the short intervals, the short moments in which you see the ghost, but the fear is going to be much longer because you're constantly thinking about it, and obviously you cannot find any sort of rest or peace because you were constantly thinking about it, constantly seeing it. So the fear was longer than the causes of fear, which of those causes are the instances in which you see it. Again, inde, here we see it once more. Thenceforth, or from there, the house, having been deserted and having been condemned, damned, in solitude. In other words, it has to be abandoned because you just can't be in there with that ghost constantly bothering you, constantly on your mind. Que, and that indeed house totally or wholly having been left behind, this is the perfect passive participle from relinquo, relinquere, reliqui, relictus, to that monster. And so therefore everybody is left from it, and now it is the ghost's house. It's the only thing that obviously is going to be there. However, it was written forth, i.e. this means that essentially it was advertised. And so it was proscribed, it was written forth, whether or. So is really a form of si where. And so therefore, since it is si where, we all know si nisi numine, all the allies fall away. And so therefore, whether anybody was wanting. So since we have that C, what we have here is the protasis of a present contrary to fact. And so therefore, with the present contrary to fact, you use the imperfect subjunctive, and that is exactly what we have here from the verb wolo wele. Wele being the infinitive, and merely all we've done is added the T to it to make the imperfect subjunctive. So whether anybody was wanting to buy that house, implied, or whether anybody, ignorant of so great an evil, not knowing that that thing is haunted, not knowing that there is a guest there, was wanting conducere. This means to hire, but in this context it's going to mean to rent. To hire a house is to rent the house. And so, then the philosopher, a fellow by the name of Athenodorus, he comes to Athens. Again, when it is a city, town, or small island, you don't need a preposition. You merely, when you go to the place, you put it in the accusative. When you go from the place, you just put it in the ablative. And when you're at the place, you put it in the locative. So, the philosopher Athenodorus comes to Athens. He reads the title. The title is going to essentially be the advertisement, the ad, if you would like. And so therefore, he reads the ad, and with the price having been heard, and so in this way, obviously, probably we can infer that it's going to be put up for sale, put up for rent at a discounted rate, because as soon as the people figure out or find out that it is going to be haunted, that there's a ghost in there that scares the wits out of you, then obviously they're not wanting to pay a lot for it. And since the vilitas, the cheapness, not having been suspected, but since the cheapness having been looked over, it's from spicio, spicide, speci, spectus, having been looked upon, like, oh, look at this, it's a great deal. So, and since the cheapness having been looked upon thoroughly, per cunctatus. And so, per cunctatus is going to essentially be a word that is going to be related to cunctator, cunctati, cunctatusum, but per cunctator in this sense, which of course is a deponent verb, is going to mean to ask thoroughly. So it's a perfect passive looking participle. And so, since the cheapness, having been looked over, and having asked thoroughly, he is taught, he is informed all things. And so in that way, obviously, he's told, yeah, there's a ghost in the house. Yeah, it's haunted, and it's creepy, and it's changed, and it makes noise, and it will, like, freak you out. And so therefore, having asked thoroughly, he is taught all things, and by nothing the less. In other words, we would say nevertheless. Nevertheless, on the contrary, he rents it. And on the contrary, by so much more. Again, a degree of difference tanto. And so therefore, more eagerly, most likely, he rents the place, conducit by so much. And so therefore, he is even more eager to obviously rent the house. Not only because of the cheapness that it is being put up for rent, but probably as a philosopher, he's going to be curious to see what's the nature of this ghost and the like. So to do it one more time, since the cheapness having been looked over thoroughly, and having asked thoroughly, a perfect passive looking participle, he is taught all things, in other words, he's informed all what's going on in this house, and by nothing the less, we would say, by nevertheless, on the contrary, by so much more, he rents it. And so therefore, he is all about getting this new house, this haunted house, as it were. So, keep studying, keep reading, and as always, best of luck.